Welcome. Last time, we met a quiet girl named Amira. She had lost everything, her parents, her home, her voice. But one teacher, Miss Clara, noticed. And with a simple gift, a notebook, Amira began to write. Not for praise, not for marks, but to survive. This is what happened after. Last time, Amira hid her notebook beneath her bed. The pages felt too messy, too raw, too small. What if no one cared? But even when fear whispered louder than hope, she didn't stop thinking about writing. Amira had written in the book before, right there in class. Her words were raw, uncertain, but real. She tore the page out and left it on the desk. Miss Clara found it, read it, and smiled. For the first time, she saw a piece of Amira's heart. Scene 1, the struggle begins. It had been days since Miss Clara gave it to her. A small, brown-covered book with blank pages that felt heavier than they looked. Every time Amira opened it, her hands trembled slightly. The first page was still empty, waiting, watching. And yet she didn't stop. The words she felt so deeply, grief, confusion, hunger, loneliness, they refused to come out. At night, she imagined stories while lying on her thin mattress, listening to the wind whistle through the cracked window. But in the quiet of the classroom, with eyes and whispers and judgment all around, she froze. It wasn't just fear of failure. It was that bitter, breathless question. What if I'm not good enough? Sometimes she'd start a sentence and erase it before finishing. Sometimes she'd stare at the clock, counting each tick, like it was a voice reminding her
She didn't belong.
Sometimes she'd write a full page, then rip it out, fold it into tiny squares, and shove it in her pocket, like a secret she was ashamed of. She didn't know what good writing sounded like. Her English wasn't like the others. She still paused on words like beautiful and enough. Her tenses twisted. Her commas wandered. Her stories felt too strange, too poor, too personal. And worse, she'd seen the smirks. She'd heard the snickers. Once, when she dropped a page she had written, someone picked it up, read it aloud in a mocking voice,
And laughed.
They didn't know it was hers, but she did, and her cheeks burned for hours. After that, she wrote more slowly, more secretly. She covered her page with her arm. She tucked her paper under her math book, if anyone walked near. Every day, she sat in that same corner desk, by the window, battling invisible enemies. Fear, self-doubt, and the weight of every unwritten word. And yet, she didn't stop, because something inside her whispered, keep going. Scene 2, real-life interruptions. Even when the classroom was quiet, Amira's world never was. At home, silence didn't mean peace. It meant absence. A mother too tired to speak. Siblings too hungry to argue. The small room they shared was crowded with needs, thin walls, and the echoes of everything they didn't say. Each evening after school, Amira walked the long road home with aching feet and an even heavier heart. She passed students eating ice cream, carrying shiny backpacks, laughing with parents who met them at the gates. She never paused. She had no money for sweets, and her mother was never waiting. She was working, always working. Her mother worked cleaning, cooking, stitching, whatever job would bring something small to stretch the week. When Amira entered the house, it wasn't to rest. It was to fetch water, to sweep the floor, to rock her baby brother. Since losing her parents, Amira's world had changed. She now lived with her aunt, who worked hard to care for Amira and her own children. Life wasn't cruel. It was just too heavy for one woman to carry alone. Her notebook sat on a shelf, between a cracked bowl and a folded prayer mat. She wanted to reach for it, but real life interrupted. One evening she tried. She wiped her hands, opened the book on her lap. Her pencil hovered in the dim light. Then her sister spilled water. The baby began to cry. She sighed, folded the page, and rose without writing a word. Another night she tried again. She wrote 3 lines. 3 good lines. But her mother's voice called. Something about missing salt.
Atornem.
The moment vanished, like steam on a cold pot. And so it went.
Try.
Interrupted. Try again. Forgotten. Still, she wrote. At odd hours. In strange places. She wrote after scrubbing pots. And folding laundry. She wrote beside the stove. Pencil in one hand, ladle in the other. She wrote at dawn, when no one else stirred, tracing sentences in half-darkness, while birds chirped like encouragement. She even wrote in her head, while fetching firewood, washing socks, standing in line for bread. She repeated her words silently, so she wouldn't forget them, before nightfall. But it wasn't easy. Sometimes, the weight of exhaustion crushed her. She'd fall asleep with her head on the notebook, wake up with faint ink marks on her cheek and a blank stare in her eyes. And worse, sometimes she began to wonder if writing even mattered. It didn't change the hunger. It didn't stop the cold wind from creeping under the door. It didn't make her shoes fit better, or her pencils last longer, or the teacher call on her more than once a week. Still, on the edge of every ordinary day, she kept trying. One word, one line, one piece of herself spilled softly onto paper. Real life interrupted her dreams, but it couldn't erase them. Scene 3, the first feedback.
It happened on a Tuesday.
After weeks of scribbling sentences in the margins of old notebooks, after nights of starting and stopping and starting again, Amira had finally written something complete. It was her first real story, the first one that felt finished. She had smiled when she reread it, not because it was perfect, but because it felt true. She folded the pages carefully, and for the first time, slipped her story into the class writing box, tucked far beneath the other brightly colored pages, barely daring to hope it would be read. She didn't write her full name, just AK in the corner, like a whispered signature. The next day, nothing happened, or the day after that. By Friday, she had almost convinced herself it was better that way. No news meant no rejection.
No word glances.
No red pen slashing through her quiet effort. But then, after morning assembly, Miss Clara stood before the class, with a paper in her hand, and a look Amira had never seen before. Something soft, curious, almost proud. "There's a piece of writing I'd like to read today," she said. Amira's heart leapt, and then immediately sank.
No. Please no.
Not out loud. Not her words. Not in front of them. Miss Clara began. It was a story about a girl who wanted to speak, but didn't know how. About a kitchen that smelled like boiled potatoes. About the sound of a baby's cough at midnight. And the way silence could scream in the dark. When Miss Clara finished, she smiled. "This story has heart," she said. "It has pain, honesty,
Depth.
I don't know who AK is yet, but I hope she keeps writing." A strange stillness filled Amira's chest. Not fear, not pride. Something unfamiliar. Something like warmth. For the first time, her words had traveled outside of her skin and landed somewhere safe. Later that day, she walked past a group of classmates. One turned to the other and said, "Did you hear that story? That was real. It made me feel something." Amira didn't stop, but her steps felt lighter. Still, when she opened her notebook that evening, she froze. Now someone knew. Now everyone might expect more. What if the next thing wasn't good enough? What if they realized it had only been a mistake?
Scene 4. The hurtful comparison. A week later, the school announced a writing contest. It was meant to be fun, Miss Clara had said. A chance for students to share their creativity, express themselves, and maybe win a little prize, a journal, a book voucher, a certificate. But to Amira, it felt like a mirror she didn't want to look into. She wasn't ready. Her words were still raw. Still shaky. Still, hers. She stayed quiet while others celebrated. But there was one student whose confidence walked into the room before she did. Her name was Layla. Layla was the kind of girl everyone noticed. Her braids were always neat. Her notebooks always knew. She smiled like she knew the answers before the questions were asked. And she spoke in the kind of English Amira only heard on cartoons and radio shows. Smooth, bright, with all the right pauses. Layla's handwriting looked like a magazine ad. Her words sparkled. Her shoes never scuffed. She printed her story the same day the contest was announced. She added glitter to the corners. She used fancy fonts. And even attached a photo from her family vacation in Spain. Amira watched her pass the paper to Miss Clara with a proud smile. Later that day, during recess, Amira sat alone by the school wall and read Layla's story. It had been shared on the bulletin board. It was about a girl flying in a hot air balloon over golden beaches and crystal seas. About eating strawberries dipped in chocolate. About a family that laughed around campfires in the Alps. It was beautiful. It was also everything Amira's life wasn't. Amira clutched her own story in her hand. A rough draft about a rainy day, a broken spoon. And the smell of pepper soup that reminded her of her father. Her pages were stained with the corner of palm oil. Her pen had smudged on the second paragraph. The words felt too heavy, too real, too small to matter. Suddenly, her story felt embarrassing. Who would want to read about mango trees and worn slippers? Who cared about a girl who couldn't even afford lunch? She folded the paper once. Then twice. Then again. And then she shoved it deep into her backpack. That night, she told her mother she had a headache and didn't want to write. She didn't mention the contest. She didn't tell Miss Clara anything. She just kept her eyes low. And her stories even lower. For days, she didn't touch the notebook. Every time she thought about writing, Layla's voice echoed in her head. This is how a real story sounds. And for the first time since she began, Amira started to wonder if maybe writing was for girls with vacations and glitter pens. Not for girls like her.
Scene 5. Doubt and Delay. Something shifted in Amira. After the contest, she still brought her notebook to school, tucked deep inside her bag, between her math book and a pencil case with a broken zipper. But she didn't open it. Not even once. It was as if her stories had gone quiet. Every time she thought of writing, that old ache crept back in, the one that whispered, "Why bother?" In class, Miss Clara continued her lessons, with the same gentle voice, the same warm eyes. But Amira avoided her gaze. She didn't want to be noticed. Not like this. She sat in her usual spot by the window, tracing the scratches on the desk, with her finger, pretending to be focused, pretending she was fine. One afternoon, Miss Clara asked if anyone had started writing. For the next reading circle, Amira lowered her head. She felt her cheeks heat. Layla raised her hand immediately. So did a few others. Miss Clara's eyes searched the room and paused, just for breath on Amira. Then she moved on. Amira felt that pause like a weight. Not pressure. Just disappointment. Not from Miss Clara. From herself.